So this is a talk on Einstein's invalid derivation of the Lorentz transformations. There's a great deal of mathematics by Einstein that does not make sense. Books like this one point out some of the mistakes. Discover, which is a science magazine, points out some of the mistakes here. So I'm going to look at the mistakes in Einstein's derivation for the maths of Lorentz transformations, and this is the relevant paper, which is in an appendix to his book, called Simple Derivation of the Lorentz Transformation. I shall go through Einstein's paper, highlighting some of the criticisms from that paper. From another paper, it's just called The Mathematical Invalidity of the Lorentz Transformation in Relativity Theory by Alexander. Other people have raised similar criticisms of Einstein's paper. So this is Einstein, and what he tells us is, for the relative orientation of the coordinate system indicated in figure 2, which is the diagram below, the x-axis of both systems permanently coincide. In the present case, we can divide the problem into parts by considering first only events which are localized on the x-axis. Any such event is represented with respect to the coordinate system k by the abscissa x and the time t, and with respect to the system k prime by the abscissa x prime and the time t prime, where x and t are given. Einstein continues, a light signal which is proceeding along the positive axis of x is transmitted according to the equation x equals ct, or x minus ct equals 0, and that's equation 1. Alexander adds for clarification where c is the speed of light, i.e. the speed of light in the vacuum. Einstein continues, since the same light signal has to be transmitted relative to k prime with the velocity c, the propagation relative to the system k prime will be represented by the following formula: x prime minus ct prime equals 0, and that's equation 2. In other words, x prime equals ct prime. Einstein then continues, those space-time points which are events which satisfy equation 1 must also satisfy equation 2. Obviously this will be the case when we have the following relation given by this equation 3 being fulfilled in general, where lambda, which is a Greek letter, indicates a constant. For, according to equation 3, the disappearance of x minus ct involves the disappearance of x prime minus ct prime. Now, Alexander calls this error 1. Court says expression 3 is useless, and he cites equation 1 and 2 again, and then he says, from equation 3, because of equation 1 and 2, we can write equation 3 as 0 equals lambda times 0. One can postulate that meaningful values, which are at least sometimes both different from 0, are somehow related. Introducing proportionality quotient between nothing and nothing has no meaning. Einstein continues in what Alexander says is error 2. If we apply similar considerations to light rays which are being transmitted along the negative x-axis. Alexander says this is an error. Explanations inapplicable. If rays of light are travelling in both positive and negative directions of the x-axis, then one cannot combine their positive and negative x coordinates as they represent different events. And he compares that to trying to add apples and oranges. You're trying to add two different things together. Einstein, however, continues. If we apply quite similar considerations to light rays which are transmitted along the negative x-axis, we obtain the condition x prime plus ct prime equals, and this is another Greek letter, mu, all times x plus ct, and that's equation 4. By adding or subtracting equations 3 and 4 and introducing for convenience the constants a and b in the places of the constants lambda and mu, he then gets the following equations, and from that he then gets his equations 5, which he labels his equations 5. Einstein, picking up from equation 5, goes on to say, we should thus have the solution of our problem if the constants a and b were known. These result from the following discussion. For the origin of k prime, we have permanently x prime equals 0, and hence, according to the first of the equations of 5, x equals bc divided by a all times t. If we call v the velocity with which the origin of k prime is moving relative to k, we then have is equation 6, where v equals bc divided by a. Alexander points out from equation 1 x equals ct, so he's now suddenly having v equals c, when v and c are supposed to be different speeds. Alexander further clarifies it as is what he's calling error 3. Expression 6 is a cardinal error. Derivation begins with the equation 1, where x equals ct for the front of the beam of the light. A few lines below, in equation 6, Einstein now presents relative speed of two coordinate systems as v equals x over t, or x equals vt in the same context. This can only be valid so long as vt equals ct or v equals c. As that was the point of inclusion of relative speed v into the equation, all that follows is meaningless. Einstein suddenly is meaningless because he's messing up v and c. And I'll clarify it here. What Einstein now says is meaningless because he's messed up v with c when they're supposed to be different things. Einstein proceeds from this to get the Lorentz transformations as follows. So this is what Einstein says, but it's now starting to be it's starting from being meaningless. He gets to equation 7 and he goes on, and he then gets to further on. Further manipulation, and he then gets this. And finally, with equation 8, he gets the Lorentz transformations relating x prime with x and t prime related to t and x. And then so this is what he then concludes. Thus we have obtained the Lorentz transformations for events on the x-axis. It satisfies the condition of equation 8a. Alexander's comment on this is, it shows a lack of mathematical skills by Einstein. Einstein writes some maths and it's meaningless. It is not to say that the Lorentz transformations are invalid. It is a piece of mathematics. Just that Einstein's derivation of them is invalid. People then come up with excuses as how to get around that invalid derivation from Einstein. But it presents a lot of problems. What does Einstein mean by his theory when he's deriving his mathematics? Is meaningless. His maths derivation is meaningless. So what is that supposed to mean? It leaves it then open to lots of attempts at trying to interpret it. So there's lots of mathematical mistakes like this in Einstein, and the mainstream just wants to sweep it under the carpet. There's lots of things the mainstream is sweeping under the carpet, and this is just another thing it likes to sweep under the carpet. Thank you. The end.